welcome to the first in a series of discussions about the place of buildings, construction and renovation in the European Green Deal. These are sponsored by Eurogypsum and organised by Ruud Pedersen Public Affairs in Brussels. I'm Chris Davis. I'm a senior advisor to Ruud Pedersen, but a former long-standing member of the European Parliament's Environment Committee. So today our theme is the place of sustainable buildings in the recovery from the economic crisis of COVID. And I suppose the first question is, what is a sustainable building? And assuming we like them, how do we get a lot more of them? So let me introduce my guests. From the European Parliament, Iskra Mihailova, a Bulgarian MP from the Renew Europe group, who recently was the shadow rapporteur for a major report on improving the energy efficiency of Europe's building stock. So good to see you again, Iskra.
Thank you. From
the European Commission, Josephina Lindblom, from DG Environment, and working, as we were discussing before, for quite a while now on how to bring the building sector into the circular economy. And Emmanuel Normand, president of Eurogypsum, which of course is the trade association, the manufacturers association for plaster and plasterboard products. Now these are regarded as pretty essential, I think, in most building materials. I have to say that just recently my daughter managed to put her foot through the ceiling of the room below. So I was required to use my plasterboard skills. But Emmanuel, let me start first of all with you. Can plasterboard be regarded as sustainable?
First, you were asking me what is a sustainable buildings. What I can say is that there are three mega trends that we are seeing in the building sectors, which is climate and energy, obviously, circular economy, so resource intensities of the buildings, and health and well-being. And actually, a sustainable building is a building that is able to address well these three mega trends jointly, not one against the other, but jointly, and this by providing also affordable housing. And actually, gypsum and plasterboard in particular is providing an answer, a very good answer on these three main elements. And that at any step of the life.
Hello, you've frozen, Emmanuel. So I'm going to come back to you, and let me turn now to Iskra, because I was just reading
the buildings. So at the time of construction, traditional, heavy. I don't hear you.
No, you're there. You're back. You'd frozen, but you're back now. Do carry on.
Okay. So I was saying that plasterboard, gypsum, is providing a great solution at any steps of the building. It can be at the time of construction, where plasterboard with much less embodied carbon than traditional building materials as cement and concrete, bricks, and so on, can, through lightweight construction, can provide great benefits in terms of impact towards climate and energy, and in terms of resource intensity. It's during the lifetime of the building, because plasterboard provides a lot of modularity, and lightweight construction is also able to add to increase the density of the building, to extend the building in height without having to re-put concrete.
Right, Emmanuel, I think you have made your plug for plasterboard very effectively. You'll get another chance, and you are the sponsor of the webinar, so but you'll get another chance shortly. Let me come to Iskra and this report that you were shadow rapporteur for just recently. I was looking at it last night, and you know, the first sentences of that report just scream at you. It says almost 40% of Europe's CO2 emissions stem from our building stock. 97% of our building stock is not truly energy efficient, and only 0.2% of our homes are subject to deep renovation each year. I mean, that's 1/5 of 1%. Iskra, on that basis, how on earth can we reach zero carbon by 2050?
Well, this is a challenge. This is a reason to have this report in the Parliament, because you know that we expect the European Commission to launch the new idea Renovation Wave in the end of this month or beginning the next one, and this is part of the Green Deal. But we decided to have our response from the Parliament, putting there all these data, and also this approach about what Emmanuel is talking, these 3 lines, but also financing of all the process, digitalization of the process, beginning from design of the buildings, construction of the buildings, maintenance of the buildings, and renovation of the buildings, and again maintenance of the buildings. So these are elements of this report, and if you continue further reading the report, you can see that we pay a very good part of the report. We focus on the opportunities for the financing of all these process, and on the creation of national visions and national plans for renovation in each one of the member states, because actually the situation is absolutely different in different member states. So we have to find the balance and to move further, because there is one other number. More than 80% of the buildings which are existing now will exist and serve to us in 2050. And we have to think about this building. If they are inefficient in energy point of view, if they are not enough sustainable, if they are not enough comfortable and safety for the people living there, and if they do not keep the environment and do not follow the climate requirements of the Union, but also they do not answer to the requirements of the citizens.
Well, you make so many points here, but of course, and the report obviously talks about things the European Union should be doing, but you make the very valid point that this really has to be done by member state governments, and there will be different national strategies. Josephina, a similar question, of course. But what is the Commission's target? What's its ambitions for reducing energy use from buildings? You're on mute, I think, Josephina.
Sorry, I had carefully muted myself, but now I'm back, yeah?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. I want to stress that, first of all, when we talk about sustainable buildings, we need to look at the full life cycle. So we know now, you mentioned a figure that buildings are using or consuming about 40% of all our total energy consumption in our societies. When you use that number, you are referring to the use phase of the building. So to heat, to cool, etc. But there is a lot of energy being used and a lot of carbon being emitted before you even start to use your building, and that is the embodied carbon, as we talk about. So that's the carbon that has been emitted while you are extracting the materials, manufacturing your construction products, etc. And that also comes back then in the renovation, at the renovation stage, because then you're putting in more material. And then how you're designing your buildings, how you use your material, how you have produced your material, and how you are able to reuse, recycle, etc. That becomes extremely important for the overall environmental performance, and then also for carbon emissions. So my point here is, if we want to have carbon neutrality by 2050, we must look at the whole life carbon.
Okay,
If there's any message that I want that I personally want to have the audience bringing back from this, is that whole life carbon will be the next thing. And I wanted to say that how do we define a sustainable building then? We have been asking ourselves that for quite some time, because we need a common language to base ourselves on when we are pushing this kind of concept forward. And now I am very happy to announce that in a few weeks' time, we will be able to launch the final version of levels. So levels is something that the Commission, different parts of the Commission, has been developing in close collaboration with stakeholders all the way back since 2015. And in the last years, it has been tested. So by lots of different, hundreds of projects throughout Europe. So it is a common language. It's a framework with a limited number of core indicators to assess and report on the sustainability performance, including whole life carbon, throughout the whole life cycle of buildings. So we want to take this kind of life cycle thinking in circularity, bringing buildings into the circularity. We want to take that from being niche, which it is today, to become the new normal. And with levels, we provide a simple entry point to that.
But in many ways, all you just said, and of course, you make some very valid points. For example, I know that cement production is responsible for, I think, 6% of the world's global CO2 emissions, and it's intrinsic to the process of making cement. But that simply demonstrates that the problem is even harder to tackle. I mean, what the renovation wave? Just explain to us what is. I mean, how is the renovation wave, whatever it is, different from what we're doing now? Because we've been talking about energy efficiency for decades.
Yeah.
Yes,
let me come to Iskra, and then I'm going to come to you, Emmanuel.
Okay.
Oh,
I beg your pardon. Well, yeah, very quickly, Iskra, and then Josephina, and back to Emmanuel.
I may say what we expect from Renovation Wave. We expect the full picture and explanation of the process in which we can involve all the actors in the process. We have to renovate our buildings, we have to make them sustainable, and we have goals for 2050. And we want to see, and we expect to see in proposal from the Commission, a model of cooperation between all the actors on European Union, on national union, on regional union, including the owners of the property in the buildings, owners of the buildings, European citizens, and of course the business which produces the materials we use for the construction and maintaining the buildings and renovation, and also the construction sector to be involved in all this. So we expect to see the proposal for the mechanism for cooperation.
Right. Okay. Well, how? So let's go back to the European Commission and Josephina. I mean, in what way is the so-called renovation wave, different from what we've been doing up to now?
Well, I think there is really a focus from the different parts of the Commission to try to bring something collectively together, which really pushes renovation very strategically. There are lots, it's going to be an action plan, as you probably know, and there are different areas then which these actions are targeting. We are looking at specifically at the responsibility, as we see it, of public buildings. We're looking at financing, of course, and what we can do to push that. And as you know, there is sort of new money coming in linked to the recovery there as well. We're focusing a lot on the quality of the renovation and the skills which are needed for that, etc. There's also a focus on the worst performing buildings and to support them specifically. You could say, well, we've heard all this before, but I think it's the first time that there's such a big focus and collective focus on this. And we also hope, of course, that the money that we will be sort of providing in this regard, both when it comes to, as I said, skills, research for that matter, but also direct projects, renovation projects, will make a difference.
And Josephina, when do we see this action plan?
Well, I'm not in charge. I'm not holding the pen, but I'm supporting the pen holders very much. But we are expecting it next month for sure, in October. Wow. Okay. So yeah, it's coming very soon. But I would just like to stress that the view that the DG Environment is taking on this, where I'm working, is of course that it is very important, as I said before, to take really a holistic look at our buildings. And when we talk about sustainable buildings, it has to be with a full life cycle, because if we want to future-proof our buildings, which is what we want to do, right? And buildings stay for a long time with us. It's not like a phone that you discard after a few years. You have to really think strategically about the life cycle impact and circularity solutions. We don't want energy efficient buildings which stay energy efficient for 10 years and then the insulation, for example, goes down in their performance, or we have to take down the building and we realize that the insulation is glued to the cement, so we have to put everything to become waste on landfill. We need to think strategically. How do we keep the buildings living for a long time with good performance?
Interesting points. Right. Well, Emmanuel, I'm going to ask you in a moment what you want to see in the action plan. But just before that, I mean, I think many of us have been to show houses, low energy show houses, where they're special. But we don't want show houses. We need to be able to change our building stock very rapidly. Tens of millions of properties. What's realistic? I mean, how realistic is it? What sort of energy saving can be achieved in a normal apartment or a normal house?
I mean, we know that we can have a housing stock that is very energy efficient. The problem today is that the rate of renovation across Europe remains very low. I mean, we are less than 1% of the building stock that is being renovated energetically each year, meaning that we need 100 years to renovate the existing building stock. So we need at least to get up to 3%. And it has been said, it's a combination of incentives and regulation that will help to achieve that higher rate. But I think that the moment is unique. Thanks to what is being done at EU level within the Green Deal and within the recovery package, and the way the recovery plans are being designed in the various countries. So there's an alignment that is possible and levers that can be used on both sides. And I want to highlight what has been said. There's one specific sector where EU is very legitimate to intervene and intervene very strongly. It's all what is related to public buildings, and in particular schools and hospitals, where we have seen in this crisis how important it is to have schools and hospitals which are at a very good standards in terms of sustainability and in terms of energy efficiency.
So in this Commission action plan to be published perhaps next month, what do you really want to see? What are your top one or two priorities?
I mean, priorities is really ambition. And it's ambition in terms of channeling resources. It's ambition in terms of working on so-called trigger points to be able to act at specific lifetime of the buildings in order to, typically when you sell a building, to make sure that the renovation that is being done when you sell a building is correctly done. And third, it's about, and that's well highlighted by Josephine, is about making sustainability mainstream through a holistic approach in terms of information, making sure that, I mean, if you want to improve the energy efficiency of your building, you need to know what is the level of energy performance of your building. That is starting with that. If you want to reduce the carbon content of your building, you need to know what is the carbon content of the building. And life cycle analysis approach at building level is absolutely essential. And I welcome the fact that the levels approach will be published quite soon.
Right, thank you. And I should mention, by the way, to those watching that if you wish to ask a question to our panelists, please use the chat facility on Zoom. And we have some polls too. I'm invited to throw these out. For example, I don't know if the administrators are ready, but poll 1 is simply to ask viewers, what do you think are the priorities for sustainability? And perhaps the administrators will find a way of putting this on the screen so that you can answer. It's beyond me, and I'll just carry on with our panelists. Okay, the point the levels that Emmanuel's just made, Josephina, about levels. I mean, this is the common language. I mean, if we're going to if money is going to be available from the EU budget to member states, and they're going to put in place as Iskra said, national strategies, then we need to be able to compare like with like from one project to another, and presumably these levels enables us to do this. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, as I said, levels will provide a common language. It sets out a limited number of indicators then to look at the full life cycle, identify the hotspots, and see what are your main concerns and what are the best solutions for that to take down or to improve environmental performance overall, and in particular I would stress in this case to reduce the whole life carbon. So yes, we see how member states which are getting more and more interested in including circularity thinking and understand the potential of driving down whole life carbon as opposed to the operational carbon, which is linked to the energy efficiency only, then we see how these member states which are interested in covering this in their own policies and building regulations, that they are looking at levels for inspiration, and they are supported by the levels work that we have. We also see how commercial certification schemes, the bigger ones, are starting to align themselves with levels because they also see the importance of this. Well, first of all, a common language, and they like the idea of how this levels has been developed with great collaboration between stakeholders. So yes, we will have a way of assessing the buildings and comparing the buildings and comparing solutions then, which will be important. I think it is very important to understand that if we want to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, we need to take the life cycle of the whole life carbon into account. Otherwise, we can forget about it. And coming back to the renovation, I would like to bring to your attention a very interesting research project or a project in France, where they have looked at renovation and the potential for reducing whole life carbon. They have assessed that as they are driving up renovation, which we all want to see throughout Europe, right? They expect to have, in the very near future, they expect to have so much more renovation projects as compared to construction projects, that actually the embodied carbon, that is the carbon that is emitted to produce the material, etc., that we are using for our buildings, the embodied carbon will be double. I mean, the embodied carbon for renovation, their renovation projects will be double that will go into new build, because of the sheer size of the renovation that they hope to have. So it means it's not something, the whole life carbon and embodied carbon thinking is not just something that you pick up for new building projects. You can't afford to not do it for renovation as well. And in the renovation wave, indeed, we will have, well, we haven't seen the final version yet, we're still discussing it, but I expect to see a number of actions which are really linking member states to this kind of thinking, where the Commission certainly will be driving a number of projects to support this kind of thinking. So to support member states in setting up roadmaps for how to drive this down, to help them with benchmarking of whole life carbon and reasonable milestones, etc.
Okay, the target is net zero emissions by 2050, and the building sector produces 40% of emissions.
I just, sorry to interrupt you, but 40% is for the use of buildings. If we look at the full life cycle of building, it is more roughly around 50%.
As I say, you just make things worse in terms of...
I'm sorry about that. I'm not popular.
I mean, in that case, just, you know, what percentage of our building stock has to be really deeply renovated each year for the next 29, 30 years in order to achieve the target?
3%.
3%. And Iskra's report says that only 0.2%. I mean, that's a 15 times increase we've got to achieve very rapidly. Is that correct? I mean, am I wrong with the figures here? I mean,
no, you're calculating right. You're calculating right. So it is as I said, a big challenge.
Well, Iskra, let's bring it down to national circumstances. You're a Bulgarian MEP.
Yes.
if you've got a 15-fold increase required in Bulgaria, I mean, what sort of policy measures would your government or would you expect to see introduced to bring that about? How do you,
Well,
how do you
these are
persuade people to do to allow the work to undertake, and how does the financing work?
the financing is the first question, but before this is the first prim question. This is question of political will and decision-making process of planning of process, because we have to know if we know the target, if we know what we have to do each year, if we want to achieve these targets, we have to plan our work and to plan our financing. This is the first challenge for each one of the member states. And I have to say that also we have to plan a real information campaign to create the new culture concerning the use, maintain, and renovation of the buildings. Because in many cases, most of the people understand renovation as something personal problem for the owner to raise the price of the building, some on the other way, or to limit the expenses of communality of this property and these buildings. But if we want to achieve such a goals, we have to create the common vision of the community to understand the role of the renovation of the buildings as linked to the environment and climate changes, sustainability of the building stocks, a quality of the life in these buildings, and also quality of all materials and technologies used for the renovation.
It's a good start, but to bring it, I mean, to the information campaign to raise awareness of the like, but you're surely never going to get a huge take up without either very significant financial incentives.
Yes.
For everyone, including, it was a perfectly good question here, saying the middle class, can afford to improve their homes, but people on lower incomes are not going to be able to borrow the money unless it's either sort of given to them or there's some sort of compulsion.
Can I just mention a very nice example to give you a flavor of what we think has been working really well? So regarding sustainable renovation of social housing, in this case, in the Piemonte and Calabria regions in Italy, there was recently a launch of several funding programs for sustainable renovation of public buildings, so in particular social housing. And that program, which was funded through the EU structural funds, had a total amount of more than 100 million euros, which targeted then specifically public administrations. And based on these programs, more than 300 buildings were certified. And I think perhaps even more importantly, more than 1,000 professionals were trained on the use of this sustainability concept. So those are examples where we can really get things happening.
I don't know. I'm sorry, Josephina. Why should anyone? I'm sorry. I'm sitting here in my own home. It's had some work done to improve the energy efficiency, though nothing like what's deep renovation that Iskra's talking about. I mean, why should I? I'm going to be dead in who knows, not too long before the payback anyway that I would get from carrying out deep renovation. There's nothing to require me to do so. Why should I do it?
Well, I think first of all, we're starting with a focus for the Renovation Wave is public buildings, and there I think it is the interest might be different than having private individuals doing it. So I think that's where we can start and see really big changes, like the example I gave you. And then when it comes to, I think what the Renovation Wave is trying to do, and now let's see what is in the final version. And as I said, I'm not holding the final pen on this, but I think what the Renovation Wave will really try to do most of all is to see how bigger I don't find the word, no, bigger groups of buildings, neighborhoods, etc., can go through changes, as opposed to trying to impact each and one of you at home at your kitchen table. Do you see what I mean? I think the major impact will be on larger groups of buildings to work with.
Yeah, but they are only a relatively small proportion. I mean, it's easier in the public sector, of course, especially with EU measures. They can set targets for national governments. National governments can introduce measures for public buildings, but the public buildings are only a minority of the total building stock.
Well, they are normally the ones which are not the best performing either, so that there's a balance to be struck there.
Can I ask? Let me just switch over to Emmanuel. There's a question here that says, how many architects across Europe take account of the full life cycle emissions when it comes to specifying building materials?
I mean,
it's a good point, isn't it? I mean,
first, before answering to that question, I want to come back on how you accelerate renovation of residential buildings across the countries. I mean, I see what's happening in France. Two main levers. I mean, there's money, but it's not only about money. It's first about providing information at certain lifetime of the buildings, and typically when the building is being sold. And more by providing this information on the energy performance of the building, which is A, B, C, D, E, we see more and more in France a relation between the value of the building, the value of the house being sold, and the energy performance of this building. And this more and more. And there you are receiving incentives to make sure that your building is correctly rated and not poorly rated. And then that is preparing what you can do a bit more tough to give a certain type of obligation, or at least a type of minimum energy performance when the building is being sold, or when the house is being rented. And that are very powerful means that are being used already in some European countries in order to enhance the level of renovation of the building stock. Then on the aspect of new buildings and having a whole life cycle approach in new buildings, as always on this type of topics, it's starting from the big buildings, big tertiary buildings, big headquarters, big office buildings of companies that are more and more being built with relevant labels that are existing, international labels or national labels around sustainability, where life cycle approach is becoming more and more a must to be able to get those certificates. And those architects that are developing those buildings are the main architects, the big architects firms that are taking into account the life cycle approach. And from that big buildings, more and more you go deeper into the whole stock of buildings and into the whole players that are able to embed more and more this type of approach.
Iskra, do you want to see minimum energy performance standards laid down at a European level? Would that help?
Yes, we want to see the minimum standards because it could help in planning. It could help in the national strategies, and it could help in the construction planning and the work of the construction sector. It will help. But I have to say that in all this mix, we pay in our discussion preferably small attention to the financing of all this process, because this is very important. And I have to say that we do not begin from the empty place. We have experience, as Josefina already mentioned, with some of the projects, but also let us remember that all the structural funds of European Union already supported renovation in some of the buildings, in some of the public buildings especially. And also there are programs in some of the member states for multifamily buildings in which we have a very good success concerning energy efficiency and sustainability of the buildings. So we have some basis, a very small percentage, 0 something, but we have to increase this percentage. And the way is to focus financing resources on the public buildings and create enough smooth and friendly to the citizens models of financing for the private buildings and private owners to be encouraged and support in their efforts to make the buildings more sustainable.
Let me just say that you've just heard from Iskra Mihailova from the European Parliament, and with me also are Josephine Limblon from the European Commission and Emmanuel Normand from Eurogypsum. And we're talking, of course, about how to make our building stock across Europe sustainable in a way that's going to create, one hopes, millions of jobs to help us pull out of the economic difficulties, as well as coping with the need to reduce our carbon emissions from our building stock. Let me just talk again to Josephina. Okay, minimum energy performance standards. I mean, in this action plan that the Commission is going to come forward, might it be specifying, for example, that every building possible should have solar panels on the roof? Should it be saying that insulation standards must be significantly improved to a minimum? I mean, how much detail is it going to get down to in terms of specifying what what standards member states must meet?
Yes, there you are. I'm sorry to come with a boring answer, but that is really the main point, I would say, for my colleagues in DG Energy. So I can answer you in general terms here, but to have the really good answer to your quite specific question, you would have to ask our colleagues at DG Energy. Okay. But I would say that, as far as I know, the Renovation Wave and its action plan, it will not go down to the details that you're asking about now. However, there will be sort of actions which will have a strong impact on your question, right? But you will not see an action which says put up solar panels on every second roof in Belgium. I mean, it doesn't come down. It doesn't come down to that. But it will gradually strengthen the requirements as well. And in particular for those worst performing buildings, there would be a great push to improve that. I would like to, if I may, just come back to answer one of your previous questions. How do we get private owners to raise their standards of their buildings as well? I think there's no one fantastic fix, right? We need to work on different levels to do that. I think one thing is to work with and educate or inform surveyors and valuers of the buildings, because if I think, as you said before, money speaks, or money talks, that's how you say, no? And if you have if you know that your building which is performing better actually is then worth more, that will be an incentive in itself, and that is currently generally not the case.
Okay, thank you. The member states, I think, are supposed to produce long-term renovation strategies. I mean, 2 questions on that. Have they? How many have not, I suppose? And are those strategies up to scratch? Do they meet the requirements?
Okay, what I know from the commissioner, because we put this question in the parliament, you can imagine this during the hearings. What I know is that maybe 1/3 of the member states already prepared their strategies.
So what was that? 1/3 or 1/5? Did you say?
1/3.
Okay, so 2/3 of European member states have not produced.
Are not ready. For my country, I know that we have kind of strategy for some of the buildings, but not the overall strategy which will cover the situation with the public buildings and private ownership, and all this picture is not clear yet. So we are trying to push, and the idea of Renovation Wave, as I said, is to give the system, the model, how to create the position of each one of the actors in all the system. But I have to say that the construction sector and the business related to the materials for the construction sector are very active, and I'm very grateful for them, because it is important to save the business on your site and to involve the business in all this process, because I see some of the comments in the chat. Yes, I think this is the momentum for this, because this is a high level of understanding, especially between young people, of the whole climate idea, preservation of the planet, and they support all the actions related to improvement of the buildings. But also we have technology solutions which are now available and enough cheap. I should mention the solar energy, which is absolutely affordable for many people now, and it is easy to include in many projects. And I am glad that this is included in the report of the Parliament, that we can use the solar power and all the renewable energies, of course. What is very important.
Sorry, you raised so many potential questions.
Yes.
You mentioned the construction sector. Emmanuel, I mean, your members, obviously, if it was a 15-fold increase in deep building renovation, then your members, as suppliers of plasterboard and the like, stand to hugely increase their business and to be able to employ many more people. So your members must be lobbying national governments intensely, are they not? And yet we hear that only 1/3 of national governments have actually produced serious renovation strategies.
Yeah, I cannot talk on behalf of the national governments. What I can say is that very short term, I'm not concerned at all on the fact that the industry is ready for a significant increase in terms of building renovation, simply because in short term, there will be quite a significant dip in new build all across Europe. And so the plants that are producing those materials for new build, the workforce that is employed for new build, and all the value chain which is towards new build is ready to switch for renovation and for deep renovation, which is more similar in terms of processes towards new build than traditional renovation maybe. So don't have any concern around the capacity of the industry to follow a massive increase in terms of renovation short term.
Okay, but they've also got to help government. I mean, clearly governments find this really difficult. A question that came up just recently in the chat here, pointing out in Italy, for example, there were funds available for renovation, but for ordinary people to try and access those funds, to demonstrate that the work is to the satisfaction of the authorities, that the work is going to be carried out to the required standard and the like. It's a minefield. And yet we are going to ask millions and millions of people in one country after another to go through this sort of process. I mean, clearly the industry people at every level needs to be helping government to come up with practical solutions if this is to be rolled out on a huge scale.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's helping the government, but also helping the people. So it's a type of it's not only to provide materials and to have a worker on site that is able to do a certain type of job. It is about being able to give confidence to the homeowner that the choices that will be made are relevant and are of quality. It's to be able to coordinate various type of workforces. It's to be able to coordinate the relationship with all the authorities that are developing incentives. it's also to be evolved to leverage on private financing that can be developed to support this type of work. And it's where what I've just said related to the new build and renovation, you have this type of competencies in the new build, interior architects, engineers that are able to coordinate this type of work, and people are ready to switch to renovation.
Let me throw a question out to, oh, by the way, just, I don't know if you've seen the results on the chat of the first poll. The first poll we asked was about, you know, what elements do you think are the priority for sustainability? Should it be energy efficiency, insulation, quality? And I see that basically everyone said all of the above. So people want apple pie, and not simply apple pie, they want apple pie with cream on it. So, okay, sustainability is everything. But let me just throw this one out. To all of you, I talked to my government's chief scientist a few years ago, who was trying to find a way of rolling out a major renovation program. And he'd been talking to a leading retailer, actually, who we think had the because it employed already 60,000 people, had the capacity to introduce a home renovation service. And the company he was talking to ran away because they said there's a huge risk of reputational damage, because we would end up employing subcontractors, and 9 out of 10 might do a perfectly good work of, for example, of installing insulation, plasterboards, or whatever, solar panels.
I can give you a lot of relationship with people that will be ready to support you immediately.
Oh, well, then I think every government in Europe might be, because I mean, I'll come back to Iskra there. I mean, Iskra, just from the point of view of being a representative, a parliamentarian, I mean, if the work program was expanded by 15 times, you would be bound to get, first of all, you'd get a lot of complaints from everyone who wasn't satisfied with the workmanship. And let's say 1 in 10 would not be satisfied, and you know, their homes would have been disrupted and have been dust and muck, and they wouldn't have seen any benefits. And then there'd be questions about, was the money being used properly, or was some of it disappearing into the wrong hands? I mean, it would cause all sorts of political problems for you, as well as potential advantages.
Okay, any action creates a political problems, anyone, and you know that. And this is we say in Bulgaria, if you are afraid, do not go to the forest. So if you're afraid, do not begin. That's why the national governments are obliged to create their national strategies and plans. And they should decide how to begin, how to go further, and how to develop the process together with the business. And I think with the great support from the business. But also let us remember that we are in a very, very special situation now in Europe. We are in the beginning of recovery, we hope, after the pandemic crisis. But the truth is that the crisis is not yet ended yet. We will continue planning how to recover. We have a special fund for recovery and resilience. We have special measures, and we try to focus on the measures which will open more jobs and which will bring the real results. And Renovation Wave and renovation, the building stock of Europe, is one of opportunities to achieve the goals of resilience and recovery of Europe.
It should be a potential.
It should be. It should
2 million
be.
jobs.
So if we do not use this instrument, we are losing many opportunities for recovery. And I'll give one of the examples related to the goals of the Green Deal and just transition mechanism. If we use the qualification tools to give qualification for the people who are working now on the mining industry, to work in the construction industry, we'll have more working places, more jobs, and more qualified people to work and implement the renovation wave, because we need people to work with this. We
Yeah.
need the business, we need technologies, but also we need people, labor force to implement all this. So there are many options, and the opportunities are open. I expect the member states to create the relative programs for recovery, which will be related to the strategies for the renovation of the building stocks.
But Josephine, building on to that, I mean, okay, there's going to be always extra money, and we've got these new financial arrangements, innovative financial arrangements from the agreed in the by the European Council. But the Commission is going to be watching very carefully how this money allocated to the member states is being spent, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. And I mean, we are preparing right now, we are preparing guidance as well for the member states as to what we are expecting them to actually incorporate when accessing this money. So you are right. I think on a previous question as well that you put regarding, okay, what about people who are not then happy with the renovation that they had, etc. The skills, I think you touched a very important thing there. It's about the trust. I can just talk for myself. I know that I would need to do some renovation work, and I've known it for years, but I hesitate because of previous renovation works that I had. I wasn't actually very satisfied, you know. So I think that the trust issue is a very big point. Maybe I've been unlucky, maybe not. So I think that's why skills become so important. And you might say it's a word that we always throw out as an important aspect, and I see you're sighing there, but really, we need to focus an enormous amount of attention to that. And you asked before, how many of the architects are taking these kinds of aspects into account? Well, we know when it comes to sustainable buildings, which goes beyond just the energy efficiency of buildings, but the more global part, we have assessed that less than 1% of the buildings in Europe have been assessed for any kind of sustainability aspect beyond energy efficiency. So we know that there's a big thing we need to do there. We need to work with architectural schools, engineers, etc.
Did I get that figure right? 1% of our buildings have been assessed for sustainability?
Yes, that is our assessment. Of course, we don't have an exact number because buildings have been there for a long time. But
the point you made about the quality of the work, I mean, Iskra in the report that was approved by the European Parliament just recently, you make the point about the need for one-stop shops, because people, and ideally, of course, a one-stop shop that can guarantee reliability of some kind, isn't it? That's what ordinary people want. They don't. You know, even if you get 3 quotations from a builder, you don't know whether the one you pick is going to be, you know, really professional.
Of course, we apply for this in the report, and we expect member states to create this system, as I mentioned many times, the framework how we will implement this idea, but also. I want to close this to see you, but also we have to think of control on how we spend the support from the European Union, and how we involve the private money in all this process, because the public money will not be enough for the whole all these goals we are putting in front of us every year, next 30 or 50 years. So we will need the support from the private money and the private sector, and it will be very important if member states will create networks with the banks, using the whole program of European Investment Bank, which is involved in the process, and also trying to attract the investors, the small investors on the local level on whole this process, because this is the key element. We cannot manage without the support of the private sector.
Right. Let's turn our last 5 minutes or so to another question, which is the wider sustainability issue, the extent to which we are adopting a life cycle analysis approach to our building materials and to the whole building stock to ensure that it meets the requirements, for the genuine requirements for sustainability. Emmanuel, let me start with you. Okay. You're president of Eurogypsum. You have a a drum to bang. You would argue, of course, that your product is benign and recyclable and such like, but it only has a small part to play in the total renovation of a building, isn't it? I mean, this whole issue of sustainability is just not really being taken account of when we look at what has to be done to renovate a building.
As a president of Eurogypsum, I can only wish that the share of plasterboard solution increase both in new build and the renovation and buildings, and there are many opportunities for it to increase. But beyond plasterboard, I mean, there's the other materials that are being used to renovate the buildings are having the same type of approach. And most of the industries, and it's a case of gypsum industries, can decarbonize, can reduce significantly the level of embodied carbon, can increase significantly the level of recycled content. I mean, gypsum is fully recyclable. It's really there again around having the right publicity framework in order to accelerate significantly the level of sustainability of all those products under a life cycle analysis approach.
Thank you, Josephina. In the European Commission, this is what you work on, isn't it? So given I think you said you've been working on this since 2013, and what do we need to do that's new that we're not doing at the moment in order to ensure that our building stock is genuinely sustainable and we are taking into account the full a full life cycle approach to emissions and the like?
Well, I think we need to be very supportive to member states, because to many this is a new area really. We have some front-running member states which are including these aspects already in their building policies. And
just tell us, who would say the leaders? Who are the people we should look to as for an example?
Well, I can mention a couple of countries which are doing a lot on this. The Netherlands, the usual suspects, right? France, Finland, Sweden. But we also see countries like, for example, Slovenia and Italy starting to look into this area as well. And as I said, they are inspired by the work we do on levels. And there are other countries as well which is starting to picking up. So yeah, there are some very good examples out there. They are actually using, you could say, kind of climate declarations on their buildings, which would be required then for permit, etc. So that there are very good examples. So we should work on those and see how we can spread that kind of way of working to other member states as well. But I also think that it is up to us to start to include this more firmly into different policy initiatives at the European level. So it's not only about supporting member states, which is an important part, but it's also, I think personally, I'm not talking for the whole European Commission here, but I do believe that we should start to be more stringent with this in different policy initiatives as well. Whether it is voluntary ones to start with, like the sustainable finance work that you've heard a lot about, which targets the building sector as well, and green public procurement and the research and innovation part that we are funding our money to, or whether it is actually to step it up to become more of a mandatory obligations, which could make part of the EPPD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, or the Energy Efficiency Directive, or things like that. I mean, we have different ways we can play this, and I think although we may be starting with this more holistic approach in a voluntary way to see where it takes us, depending on how we move on, I would personally see that we may have to step up requirements. And we are going to start to now in the Commission to develop a roadmap up to 2050, where we look at the reduction of whole life carbon with milestones then for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Iskra, very just final quick word. I mean, would you welcome such requirements? Do you think governments would actually welcome being told what they have to do at a European level, because it would make it easier to deliver politically, domestically?
I hope so. I hope so. I hope that the situation now and the moment will make the governments more flexible, and they will be open to discuss this on the European level. But I will mention that the most important, of course, it is to be in the link on the European level, but also it is very important to include the construction sector and the whole business which is related to construction and renovation of the building stock of Europe. Because without the support of these companies, their technologies, their knowledge, and their wish to continue working in this direction, all our plans on European or on national level will be empty plans. So we have to work together with the business.
Well, thank you very much.
Neighborhoods.
Thank you very much, Iskra Mihailova from the European Parliament. Emmanuel Normand from the President of Eurogypsum will have been pleased to have heard your last words. Thank you, Emmanuel. And Josephina Lindblom in the European Commission. Well, good luck. As you may have seen from one of our polls, people are saying what's really needed is addressing the regulatory and financial arrangements, and the scale of requirements is just huge. So apologize to those who've submitted questions that I've not had a chance to put to our panelists, but thank you all for your insights, both the panelists and those who've been contributing. If the business of sustainability in construction and energy saving is of interest to you, then please keep an eye out for our next webinar. I'm told it's going to be on biodiversity and the construction sector. You heard that right. I mean, if I've read it right, it's biodiversity and the construction sector. Those who registered for this event will get a notification of the next one. Otherwise, please keep a lookout on the social media sites for Eurogypsum and Ruud Pedersen Public Affairs in Brussels. I'm Chris Davis, and in the nicest possible way, I'm telling you now, please go away and think about how you can renovate your home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.